Speaker, well, here we go again, another return to Parliament and another attempt from this government to play fast and loose with the democratic arrangements of this House. Now, this is clearly becoming a pattern, and I think this nation is starting to get really concerned and quite anxious about this government's casual disregard for a lot of our parliamentary conventions and scrutiny. First, Mr Speaker, went to all the horrors of these grotesque Henry VIII powers in the repeal bill. Then we had the government fixing the committees, the standing committees of the House, so they could have a majority in each and every single one of them. And now we've got all this nonsense about opposition day debates and what the government will or will not do in response to them. And I think, Mr Speaker, I've identified what the problem is with this particular government. And it just singularly cannot accept its status as a minority government. I think that is the basis and the hilt of what we have got here. And it seems to be doing everything possible to try and deny that new reality. And it seems the harder they try to deny that reality, the worse it gets for a democratic democracy and our parliamentary structures. This minority government has 317 members out of the 650 members available. That's 48.7% of the membership of this House. It is clearly a minority government, and instead of fighting that reality, why doesn't it simply embrace it and accept it? Then we could all get on with our business normally as a minority government trying to govern in this country. Yes, of course we'll give way to them.
To the member for giving way, particularly as he's speaking about minority governments, which his party now is in Scotland. When the SNP were the majority in Scotland, they passed the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act bill. In minority, they were defeated by all the opposition parties to repeal the bill over a year ago. Can you tell me the status of that? Has your party repealed the bill, or do you fail to respect the Scottish Parliament vote?
I'm really grateful to the Honourable Gentleman because I'm going to come to these points because I think it's really, really important about how minority governments respond to defeats in Parliament. And the right thing to do is what the Scottish Government does, which is to review, to reflect and consult. Now, we had the issue in the Scottish Parliament where we were defeated on an issue of fracking. We were defeated in the Scottish Parliament. Now, what did we do? It wasn't an attempt to ignore that vote and get away with it. We went and consulted, we reviewed, we came back to Parliament, and we have now banned fracking in the Scottish Parliament. That is how you responsibly behave when you are in a minority situation, and I will take no lectures from the Honourable Gentleman whose commitment towards democratic decisions extends to the Honourable Member for Angus not even voting in the European Union referendum. So, Mr Speaker, there's certain things that you have to learn when you're in a minority situation in Parliament. And firstly, I think the main lesson is that governments sometimes get beat. You get beat here, you get beat in the Scottish Parliament. That is a feature of being a minority government in a situation in a Parliament such as this. And it's all right, that happens. That's what happens normally in Parliaments right across Europe. And this government shouldn't overly fret about that. They paid £1.25 billion to the Democratic Unionist Party in order to ensure it's got a majority if it's ever threatened with its existence or survival. And this House has also got to recognise that we represent and reflect the democratic will of the people of this country. And I sometimes enjoy being lectured by Conservative backbenchers about parliamentary sovereignty. Well, I'm talking about parliamentary sovereignty, so I'll hear from the Honourable Lady on this particular issue.
I'm very grateful for the Honourable Member giving way because he has mentioned twice the words will of the people and sovereignty and respecting the will of the people. Does he respect the will of the people in the two referendums that have recently taken place, one in Scotland and one on the European Union?
I tell you what, I think about the will of the people. I was elected just a couple of months ago. Yes. I won an election. Yes, the gentleman that I beat in that election is now in the House of Lords as an unelected Scottish office peer. That is how you reject democracy. That is how you play fast and loose with the will of the people, where you're rejected one minute and you're ennobled the next. So I again will take no lecture from the Honourable Lady. How could I resist the Honourable Gentleman?
I say to the Honourable Gentleman, I'm one of the people as well, and I will conduct my voting in this chamber entirely upon the basis of my own opinion and my own conscience. It is I who decide when and how to vote, not the government. On that occasion, I chose to deploy my votes accordingly. I was in agreement with the first motion because the lead which I tend to take from my front bench was in agreement with it. Why would I therefore choose to oppose it? On the second motion, although I was against the sentiments being expressed, it was clear to me that in accordance with the statute, however I express my opinion, it would make no difference. And that's the matter in a nutshell.
Order. I exercise some latitude for the right honourable member for New Forest West, not least in light of his stirring performance this morning when he asked the most succinct question. But that was a mini speech rather than an intervention. And I simply take this opportunity to remind the House that the debate can last until 6:03. The honourable gentleman has not taken up a great deal of time so far, so it's not directed specifically at him, but I simply make the point, if members want to speak, try to help each other, and that means refraining from, dare I say it, lengthy or self-indulgent interventions. Mr Pete Wishart.
And what would we have done without the contribution from the honourable member, Mr Speaker, which, of course, he does what he wants, as he always has done, and make sure he always does that in the future. But I want to come back, and I've got a little sidetrack there with the very interesting intervention from the honourable gentleman about this notion of parliamentary sovereignty, something that my friends in the Conservative backbenches hold to very, very dear. This is expressing the will of the people in this House. Parliamentary sovereignty is the be-all and end-alls. We're even committing this great indulgence of economic, cultural and political self-harm by leaving the European Union so they can have more parliamentary sovereignty. Well, start to demonstrate this by recognising that this is a minority parliament and we're here to serve all the people in the country, and we have to have our arrangements to make sure that we properly reflect that. But this government seems to see being defeated as some sort of virility symbol, as if it shatters its delusion that somehow it's a majority. And I believe when it comes to these issues, the government is going to have to stop behaving so arrogantly. It's got to accept its minority status and act with a little bit of humility. Now, it went to the people a few short months ago to ask for a mandate, to ask for an increase in its majority. That's what they did. That's what it's all about. It was taking advantage of this, what they saw as a situation in the Labour Party. What happened? It came back as a minority. It lost its majority. So maybe responding a little bit more with less arrogance, a bit more humility, would actually do the government some good when it's like this. Yeah. And the second principle of minority government, Mr Speaker, is that sometimes you do have to work harder to get your way. That is what happens again in other parliaments, and this is what we're seeing no example from the Leader of the House today. There's no point trying to bludgeon your will in Parliament like this government is currently doing. It's much better to negotiate and deal your way into ensuring that you get solutions. And I thought that was what we're going to get. And I won't break the confidence of my meetings with the Honourable Lady, except to say this, that when I had my first conversation with her, I was encouraged by what she had to say in her approach to Parliament, where it seemed to be setting out the basis of consensus about trying to get agreement, about trying to progress peace legislation and motions through Parliament on the basis of agreement. That seems to have all have gone, and I wish we'd had the earlier Leader of the House instead of the one that's standing here just now that seems to be putting all this out. The question, yes, I'll give you, Honourable Lady.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He talks about consensus and agreement, but that's exactly what we reached during that Opposition Day debate, and yet the members opposite are still not happy.
Well, I want to come to these Opposition Days debate because I know this is the intention behind this whole debate. I just don't really quite understand the government's position. This Opposition Days are a real feature of this Parliament. I've been in this House for 16 years and I've always enjoyed Opposition Day debates. There's always a little bit of tension. There's always some good speeches made in these things. And it tackles subjects that normally governments wouldn't bring to this House because it might just potentially embarrass some of the stuff that they might be uncomfortable with. But they employ a really important function in this House, and it's really important that we don't lose sight of the role that they have within this House. But the most important thing, I believe, about Opposition Day debates is that there's a conclusion to them, that there's some sort of decision taken by this House with these motions. And the day that we play fast and loose with that particular arrangement, I think is the day that we really devalue these Opposition Day debates. Now, we've got backbench business debates, we've got adjournment debates. We don't need glorified adjournment debates. We need real debates which hold this government to account, which we can make a decision about and then move on and respect that decision. And these votes aren't binding on one government. Now, we accept that. I mean, we're a minority government in Scotland. We know exactly how these things happen. We will get beaten. The government will get beaten. The key thing for this government is that they don't have to be... Nobody's expecting the government to change its policy or direction on certain issues just because it gets beaten in a Labour Party opposition demotion. That's the last thing people expect. But what it does do is reflect the will of this House. And what I think the people expect to therefore happen after that is that the government responds to it in a particularly positive way, not just try to avoid votes, not just try to dismiss these debates, but respond, say something about it, go back and consult, review your position, come back to the House with a new set of recommendations about how these are the things that I think that the people that we represent want from our Parliament and want from this government. I think I've had enough from the Director, if he doesn't mind. He took about 25 minutes of the time, so if he doesn't mind, we'll just move on. Mr. Speaker, we on these benches do have a little bit of experience of minority government. This is our second session of Parliament that we've been in a minority government, so we do know a little bit how we actually started. When we had a minority government with, I think it was 2 members more than the second party, now we're just 2 short of a majority. But each of these cases we've tended to try to run and function as a minority government, respecting the view that we haven't got majority and trying to work in consensus and partnership with other particular parties. And the exercise we're doing around the budget is an example of how you could do these things in a minority parliament. I mentioned the issue about fracking. I think that's important how we respond to that. Come back to Parliament with another view, and I think that's important to do that. On other issues that we were defeated, we're going to consult further and address the concerns as we can when we come here. Mr. Speaker, I think that's how you govern as a minority government. And I'm happy to talk through with the Leader of the House to help her better understand. She wants to come to the Scottish National Party. We could give her some lessons about running a minority government if she's having some difficulty with this, which it seems that she is. So come and have a chat with us. I won't break the confidence of her meeting with me as she did with me at Business Questions last time. But, come and have a chat. We can maybe talk through some of these things. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. As we've heard, it's been 12 months since the Scottish Government were defeated and still at the consultation stage, whereas in the 4 weeks since the House expressed a view on those 2 motions, the Government has announced a change in policy on tuition fees for next year's level of tuition fees, and has also announced different terms of reference for the public pay review bodies. So it has done exactly what he is asking of the government in terms of considering, reviewing, and I'm sure we'll come back to this House.
Still, the honourable gentleman's list. I'm not making any criticism of the government here. All I'm saying is, I'm actually trying to give her some advice about how you do this, and trying to get this government into its head, its minority status, and trying to help and assist this government deal with that very issue. So I don't know if he's not been particularly listening to what I'm saying. And it's good that they're reviewing. That's what you do, and continue to do that. But what you also have to do when it comes to these opposition day debates is to conclude them and to vote on them and express an opinion, because it's important that our constituents hear us standing here in Parliament deciding on these important issues, and they know our views on this, because the only way they're going to find out how we think about a particular issue or subject is if we vote on it. It's the only way that can determine it, and that's why we cannot lose this. Now, I don't know if the government's intending to not vote any further on opposition to motions. I'm not particularly interested in what Paul Ross got to say in the Huffington Post on a particular day. I'd like to have heard from the Leader of the House, if she could tease her up again, just to say definitively yes or no that she is intending at some point for her government to vote on opposition day motions. I'll give her the chance to say that, as it will be an option to the government, and they will. Well, she's shaking her head, or sort of. No, she's not. Yeah. Well, that's good, and that's what we expect. And I think all we needed to hear from this whole debate was the Leader of the House just say to us, well, we did that the first day because we thought they were playing a political game, but we'll come back and we'll vote. We'll vote on opposition day motions. We'll get opposition days. I'd like to think the government would come along and vote on them. But, Mr. Speaker, we really have to start to get on top of all this. This has been a particularly bad start to the Parliament, and I listened to the Leader of the House talking about all the things she's done, select committees put in place earlier than usual. What utter bunkum. And I think what we need to see now, we're back for this long session of Parliament right up to Christmas. Let's start to show that we respect the political arrangements in the House, the structures, the way that we've done things traditionally, that we could still approach these issues collegiately and consensually where we can. The government has also got to get into its head that it is a minority government. We've seen no evidence of that just now. And I think that as we go through this session of Parliament, a little bit more of a demonstration of where it is just now would be useful and good. And I hope we don't have to have any more of these debates. I mean, I've been standing here making these debates now for the past few months on almost a weekly basis. But this is something that we really need to get over. We need to see this government is respecting its position, and we need to see it respecting the traditions of this House.